Welcome back to my adventures, where every adventure is unique. Today we'll be discussing the Tour du Mont Blanc, my experience, risk and rewards, and this is part 1. The Tour du Mont Blanc, for those who are not familiar, is in the southeast corner of France at the intersecting borders of Switzerland, Italy, and France. You can see the Swiss border cutting across this section, and then the Italian border goes through the central axis, and this is the French side. Mont Blanc itself resides slightly off the halfway mark in the longitudinal axis, and is occupied partially in France and partially in Italy. On the French side, you have the city of Chamonix, and on the Italian side, you have the city of Courmayeur. And there are cable cars that access Mont Blanc region and allows you to sort of traverse over this section here and get panoramic views. It's quite expensive. I think it's around 80 euros to do. There's different rates for different heights and distances. So I don't have the exact numbers, but I recall they're around £80 or 80 euros to go up at least partial part of the way from Chamonix. This red line that you see is the traditional Tour du Mont Blanc circumnavigation of the massif itself, which contains several mountains besides the Mont Blanc itself, and probably the most famous one is Grand Jurasse, which is in this section here, but there's others, aiguillettes and mountains that are contained within this massif. The traditional route begins in Les Houches, which is here, and the traditional direction is to go counterclockwise. This is the standard route, and you go through Italy and Switzerland and back to Les Houches. There's nothing to say you have to start, because it's a circumnavigation. There's nothing to say you have to start in Les Houches. You can also start in Chamonix, although Chamonix is not on the route. You can start in Chamonix or Triant, which is in Switzerland, or in Courmayeur, which is in Italy, or any other location on the tour that's in a village or a town and accessible by car or bus. It's possible probably to also come to a nearby city and hike in and then pick the tour up. I'm sure that's possible too. So there's really no need to start at any specific location to circumnavigate. I think probably the reason Les Houches is chosen is because it's sort of a nice introduction to hiking in terms of the demands, and other sections may be more demanding and not as easily accessible for people who aren't used to mountain hiking. So that's probably one reason it's been chosen as the traditional start point. And whether you go counterclockwise or clockwise is again your decision. I would say, in my experience, there was probably more people going counterclockwise, but there certainly was some traffic in the counterclockwise directions, and in particular during the end of August there is the Ultra Tour du Mont Blanc, which is a trail running competition, and most of the trail runners that I saw were all going in the clockwise direction. So there's certainly hikers going in the clockwise. I think the majority of hikers I spoke to who were going clockwise had already gone in the counterclockwise direction previously, and they wanted to basically see a different view of the tour from a different perspective. And I'm sure it's going to give you a different experience when you're going in clockwise, having gone in the counterclockwise. It may be a direction I would consider if I went back, is to go in the clockwise direction, just to make it feel new, and you would also basically get to see different perspectives of the mountain ranges in that direction. So in terms of difficulty, Ciccarone states that it's really not much different overall. Whether you go in clockwise or counterclockwise, the end result is quite comparable in terms of effort and challenge. I'm sure there are certain parts of these sections that may be more or less demanding depending on what direction you're going. In particular, I'm thinking about the Fenêtre des Arpets. I've done the Champay Lac to Le Puy direction, and I can have some confidence knowing that the reverse of that section will be a different experience for sure compared to what I did. So there's one example of where I think direction does matter. The variants that I did, the ones that are listed in the Cicciarone guidebook, and the variants that I did are highlighted in red, and then the one that I didn't do is variant 5A, which was from Refugio Bertoni to Mont de la Saxe, which is the high route between those two. It's in this section here, and I chose to do the low route that day, which had a nice shaded walk, forested shaded walk trail. You still got a really great view of the Mont Blanc Massif, although it was at a lower elevation. But because it was a bright sunny day, taking the high route would have meant a long day in the hot sun. So I decided to take the low route that day just because. Certainly, I heard some other people who said it was a great experience, but you have to at times gauge your effort to your energy, and it's possible to take always more variants, but on that day I felt it was a really nice trail to go on the low route, so I did that, and I probably did miss a bit, but I don't think it was total loss. Have I chose to do it again, I may take the haute route again, but I did do quite a few variants. The first one from Colvosa to Col de Tricot is down in this lower section in here. They've actually marked it. So you go from Leuge to Colvosa, and then you come up the high route, the haute route to Col de Tricot, and then down into Miage, and then onward into Lake Contamine. The low route, the normal route, is to basically bypass all that elevation and climbing and descending and simply do this lower view. You can see it in here on the map. It's shown. So I didn't do the low route. I went with the high route. The other one is when you get to they call it the variant 2A. It's to go from Col de la Croix Bonhomme to Col des Fours, and then eventually you get down to Les Contamines. If you take that direction, actually, pardon me, you go down to Ville des Glaciers. First, let me just see here. I've got all the names of the places that I traveled and the kilometers related to them from the start at Leuge, and then the altitudes listed in this table here. So from from Lake Contamine, from the Col de la Croix de Bonhomme, you actually travel backwards because you come in from the Col de Bonhomme. So you actually go back. This is a variant. You go back to the Col de Bonhomme, and then you go to Col des Fours. I took another variant. This one here, Col des Fours to Tête Nord des Fours, which is an out and back. So you go out to the Tête Nord des Fours, and then you come back to the Col des Fours, and then you go down to Les Touffes. And as I said earlier, La Ville des Glaciers is the destination where it meets up again with the original tour. So that was another 2 variants that I did. So that's 3 variants in total. And from there, I took the standard route into Courmayeur, save the one section where I got into Lac Combal and did some stealth camping there. And then the weather at night, a thunderstorm rolled in, quite intense one. There was heavy rain throughout the night, and in the morning there was a slight break. but it was still overcast and raining and thundering. So I basically packed my tent in a slightly dry spell, and then walked down to La Vissée and caught a bus into Courmayeur, where I didn't really want to do that, but the alternate route simply wasn't it wasn't safe, and it was dangerous. It wasn't safe because of the lightning of the storm. There was heavy rain, so there's quite a steep descent into Courmayeur from on that route. If you take the normal route, it's quite a steep descent, and it's not recommended. Chicharrones didn't recommend it if the weather was poor. You also wouldn't see anything on the pass. It's not a pass; it's more of a high point. Basically, you're putting in the effort to get up there. You really can't see anything. You're putting yourself at risk for lightning, which is always a concern. And then you have a very steep descent into Courmayeur in heavy rain, which basically is a risk for falling or slipping. So there was a lot to decide not to take that route. And then I basically, like I say, I walked down to La Vissée and caught a bus into Courmayeur. And actually the bus was full with hikers, so I wasn't alone in that decision. I think it was the smart decision. It wasn't the one I wanted to do, but it was simply sometimes you have to accept that the weather is going to impact your itinerary. The next one I did was the variant 8A, and that is as shown on here. It's the Champé-Lac to Fenêtre des Arpets, and then down into Les Puydis. The Puydis is a bit of a variant. You can go, the normal route I think comes into Triant, but there's a slight variant. It's only about a 15-minute difference in the walk. The nice thing about Les Puydis, they have a campsite there, and it allows you to head to the next day up to the Col des Balmes. So that's what I did, along with others. And the other one I did was for reasons of campsite. When I got into Tres La Champ on section 9, I basically went further about 4 or 5 kilometers to a campsite in Les Chaux-Soleil. There is a campsite in Tres La Champ, but he wanted like 40 euros a night just to pop your tent up. And the 4 to 5 kilometer walk to Les Chaux-Soleil, they wanted 8 euros, and they had a really good cafe there with really good food. So I think it was the right choice. And again, it's an out and back, so you go to Les Chaux-Soleil, and then you come back the next day to Tres La Champ. Then the variant 10A is a variant that bypasses the ladders section to Tétevon. I decided to take that for several reasons I'll discuss later, but it's a different route that you basically don't have to climb the ladders to get to Tétevon. So you go Tres La Champ to Col des Monts to Tétevon. So it's a bit circuitous route. It's probably a little bit longer. I think the elevation is the same because the end result is Tétevon. At the end of the day, you get to the same place. You just don't have to climb the ladders, and I'll discuss why I chose not to do that on 10A. And then there was a last variant when I got to Parc des Malais. The tour did carry on into Les Houches, but I decided to take the tarmac route all the way down rather than taking the tour because, again, of conditions and circumstances. There was a bit of a risk there for me to take that route, so I took the longer route through the roads that wind down from Parc des Malais, into Les Houches. So that was my tour. I went in September. That was the month I chose to go after reading about it before I went. I think the season is open basically May to October for the hike. I'm sure other people, who are experienced hikers in winter conditions possibly could do any time between October and May. I don't think they won't allow you to hike during that point, but it's just very dangerous unless you're an experienced hiker in winter weather. Obviously, people are climbing and skiing. So, the Massif doesn't, shut down at all during the season. But traditionally, the hiking season is May to October. May is still considered quite difficult because there's still a lot of snow on the high passes, even till about mid-June. They say there's still snow on the high pass, which can be difficult to navigate through if you don't really know where you're going. And then probably from mid-June on, it ramps up quite heavily in July and August, the peak month being August. A lot of the tourists and Europeans go during August because that's their holiday month. And then September, it winds down quite dramatically and then tapers off to much less in October. I found the choice of, I was in there August 30th till September 13th. I thought that was an excellent time to be there. The weather was quite good. It got a bit more unsettled as I got deeper into September, but I think overall the weather that I came across was relatively settled and quite good. The days were warm but not hot, and the nights were cool but not cold. The coldest night was -5 C. One of the cols, that was the Col de la Croix Bonhomme, which is quite high in elevation. And I think the warmest day in some of the valleys, you get higher temperatures in the valleys, obviously, and I think that was maybe 23 or 24 C. So it was quite pleasant to hike. I've heard people talk about August being very unpleasant in the valleys to hike because of the temperatures. You also get a lot more afternoon rainstorms in August and July. The amount of people on the trail is going to be much higher these months, which means, if you're trying to get into the refugio or refuge, it could be much more difficult to get rooms without having pre-booked 6 to 8 to 12 months in advance, which a lot of people are doing these days just because of the lack of availability. And September, there's far less people on the trail. There's less insects. There's more insects around here. You don't have to pass as many people on the trail, and not as many people are passing you. So I think usually the prices are lower, I think, too, for hotels, restaurants. In general, this is the season is basically peaking here, and then it drops down quite precipitously. So you're starting to see lower rates available. The benefits to September seem overwhelming, unless you really want to be around a lot of other hikers and you're going more for the social aspects rather than hiking and nature, and sort of you appreciate the solitude of hiking alone. Maybe July and August are your choices. That's up to you. I mean, everybody's different. I ended up doing the tour in 8 hiking days. I was there for 14 days. And I ended up doing it in 8 days. It wasn't I wasn't trying to rush through and get it done and sort of compete or race to get it done in 8 days. That's just the circumstances turned out to be 8 days. I probably would have preferred it to be 11 or 12 days with 14 days down there. But circumstances weren't in my favor, and I ended up completing the tour in 8 hiking days, which didn't feel too rushed. I actually had 2 rest days in Courmayeur and another rest day in Champex-Lac. And then the last days I spent in Chamonix after the tour was over. So overall, it felt really quite relaxed. There were a couple days that were a bit hectic, but in general, it was well-enjoyed period of time. So that was my quick itinerary and summary, and these are all the places that, if you have the Chicharron guidebook, you will see these listed. And the yellow markers are saying the night where I basically stopped, what location I stopped to sleep. So the first day was Refuge Miage, and then the next was Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. And then the others are listed here. I did stealth camp in Lac Combal in the Valley Veni, which is illegal, but it was late at night, and I didn't have much choice. And the next day, like I say, it rained overnight, so I ended up doing a very short hike, probably about 3 or 4 kilometers to La Vessée, and then I caught the bus to Courmayeur. So this is kind of really one day instead of basically, this was a couple-hour hike. It wasn't really what you consider a day hike. So in general, it was eight hiking days. And I'll discuss the locations where I camped a bit later in the chat. So this is the Tour du Mont Blanc hiking profile of the route that I chose, and everybody's route will be different unless they do the exact same variants that I showed. But in general, this was the outline profile, and as you can see, it's basically climbing and descending continuously throughout the tour. There's really no flat spots to speak of, where you're going to feel you've gotten a rest. And even some of the sections that are considered quote unquote flat, I think it's section 7 from La Foulie to Champé-Lac. They say it's supposed to be the flat route, but it is flat for a while. There's a gradual descent, but then there's a really sharp kick from Isère to Champé-Lac that makes it still relatively challenging, just because of the short and steepness of it. The points in yellow are again where I stayed while I was hiking, so you can see the different places that elevations and locations. The blue one here is the Tête Nord des Forts. This is the high point at 2756 meters. That was the high point for my tour. And then there were other points where the elevation was slightly less. The Fenêtre d'Arpet at 2665, followed closely by the Col des Forts, which is the exact same elevation, and then Les Bravants at 2525. So those were some of the high points that I was at the tour. And then the low points, Les Houches was at 1,007 meters, and everything else was above that. So it gives you an idea of what you can expect on your tour. Even if you take the traditional route, you're still going to see this type of profile. We're going from 0 to 170 kilometers, and from 1,000 to roughly 3,000 meters, and it's continuously up and down every day. So you need to get prepared physically to sort of complete something like this. There's La Vissée into Courmayeur, where I took the bus. And as I say, the normal route would have come up to a high point, and then it simply drops precipitously down into Courmayeur. I think there's a ski slope there where they do skiing in the winter, and I think that's why the drop here is so high. But that's where it was dangerous. And then the elevation is an exposed ridge here. During the thunderstorm is not a good spot to be on. And with heavy rains, it was simply a question of safety that I bypassed that part. But I took several other variants to complete my tour, and I could say I felt I've completed the entire tour in total. So that was what I ended up doing. One thing, speaking with lots of people, English-speaking people, obviously, is the French-Italian pronunciation. There was a lot of butchering of foreign languages, Italian or French. Pretty much on the Tour du Mont Blanc, I think the predominant language was French. You would obviously get some Italian. It was either Italian and French, and mostly it was French, I would say, even during the sections through Italy, because obviously people are going around the tour, so they're not like just, Italians aren't just standing in the Italian section. They're also going around. So, but I would say French was the most widely used language, and it was universally butchered by most English speakers. So this is just kind of a little quick rundown of Italian pronunciation, or more French than Italian, but pronunciation just to help. What I'm suggesting is that, if you can learn the 48 words that are listed here of the locations, it will help you, pronounce other words in French, and it also opens up a lot of doors. I can assure you that if you speak to a French person and can't really pronounce these names, they're probably going to respond to you with, I don't speak English sort of response, and, there really won't be a dialogue at all. Whereas if you can speak these words, relatively well, they'll know you put the effort in, and suddenly they'll try and speak to you in English, which will also be at times butchered, but probably better than your French. And you'll have a good conversation, because there's a lot of French hikers on the tour, and you're simply cutting out 40% of the hikers if you don't even make an attempt to learn how to pronounce the names. So I highly suggest you spend 10-15 minutes trying to go over these a couple times before you go, and then you'll really be surprised at how much more willing French people will speak to you if you can sort of half pronounce their these names. So what I do, one thing that's really important is that the S and the T at the end of the word in French are usually silent. So keep that in mind when you see a T at the end, like ferret. Probably most English speakers would say ferret, but in French you drop the E, so it becomes ferret. And when there's an S, like in this word here, this is a place, les contamines. Probably we want to say les contamines, but the S is silent, so the pronunciation is les contamines, and the S is silent. And that goes for any of the other words that you're seeing. Col des Fours, it's not fours, it's Col des Fours, no S. Any of the other words, Pras des Fours, there's no T. The T isn't pronounced. So usually when you see an S or a T at the end, you don't pronounce it, whereas in English it would probably be quite high. You'd say like Col de Tricot. Well, it's actually Col de Tricot. So the T is silent. So what I use is translate with phonemes, and my French isn't perfect, so I use these little phonemes to try to improve. And you're taking words like bonjour into bonjour by simply doing this. The way I get the pronunciation correct is I go to Google Translate, and there's a listen button, and you can use French to English, and you simply type in the French word and you hit listen, and it will give you the correct pronunciation, which I then translate into my own phoneme, basically by what I think it sounds like to me. And then so you simply keep that in. There's no right or wrong here. It's simply whatever makes it sound as close to that as you can, and whatever you come up with, whatever method you come up to create this, it's your choice, but it gets it into the correct form when you use a tool like this. There's other tools. I'm just saying this is a cheap one that's free. Like I say, try to take some time to practice these sounds, and then what will happen is when you see other words that are similarly spelt, or you come across, you'll suddenly start saying them correctly, simply because you remember how to say that word, and some variation of it is probably going to be the same. So we have Col de Monte, and next time you see that sort of spelling similar to it, you're probably going to be able to pronounce it correctly rather than butchering it further. French words in general tend to be soft flowing and merged to, I had a friend who was French, and basically, the intention is to make pleasant sounds. They want their language to sound pleasing instead of harsh or abrupt. Whether they accomplish that that's how they see it. That's a lot of the reasons I think you get the pronunciation of French words that you see that don't necessarily agree with the spelling. It's because they've evolved it so that it actually comes out and they think it sounds pleasant. So that's why you'll see words like bonjour instead of say bonjour. It's bonjour. They want to make it sound pleasant. So keep that in mind when you're trying to pronounce some of these words. When you're in Italy, try to speak Italian. I mean, once I crossed the border, I did try to butcher a bit of Italian as well, and especially when you're Courmayeur, try to speak Italian with the natives there. Again, you'll get a better reception if you even butcher a few words or attempt to make some, suddenly you'll get people trying to speak back to you with some broken English, and you'll have a decent conversation, meet somebody new. And I don't know, I think it's fun to try and learn different languages. Other people may not, but it's up to you. I mean, if you don't try to learn any English or any French or Italian, you're basically cutting about 60% of the hiking population out of your experience. It's your choice, but you don't have to put too much effort in to have people appreciate that you're trying. They don't expect you to be fluent. They just expect you to try. And if you don't try at all, it just sort of says, well, I don't care about you at all. So why should they care about you if you don't care about them at all? So, like I say, most names you'll see on the Tour du Mont Blanc are in French. I don't know, there must be some historical significance, but even the Italian and the Swiss side, the names don't change that much. You might get Refugio instead of Refuge, or Refugee. This is Italian, this is French, but that's as probably as significant as I see. There's a couple like Refugio. Bonatti is obviously Italian, and Refuge. Berton, again, is Italian, but in general, a lot of the names are in Switzerland and French, and in Italy are in French. So it must be some historical reason. I don't know what the reason is. Must be that, though. Borders change over time, so maybe it was predominantly French at one time. In general, Swiss people can speak French, Italian, and German. There's no Swiss language. There's French, Italian, and German sections in Switzerland. And in general, they tend to speak all three. But again, on the Tour du Mont Blanc, French was used mostly by Swiss speakers in the shops and the stores. So again, if your French is not too bad, you're going to get by quite well. You can certainly use English and still survive, but like I say, you might not be experiencing responses or reactions with other people on the hike because you simply choose not to learn a few words. It's your choice. But so let's just go through a few. So Chalet Val Ferret. Again, Chalet Val Ferret is my phoneme for that. And then Refugio, Ailina, yeah. And then Grand Col Ferret, Tre Le Champ, not Tre La Champ, it's Tre La Champ. Again, pleasing sounds. Les Chaussées, yeah, Les Chaussées. I try to get something close. This one's a bit challenging, I think, for English speakers. It's L'Aiguillette des Posettes. L'Aiguillette des Posettes. This one here is Réfugié du Col de Balma. This here. And then we have Le Petit and Tête au Vent. This is an O. So Tête au Vent. This one again is a Refugié La Flégère. Again, you can see this sort of a jure and ger sounds are quite common in French. So Refugié La Flégère, Plein Prat, Col du Bravon, Le Bravon, Refugié Belachat. What else do we have here? Chalet du Glacier, Chalet du Glacier, Fenêtre d'Arpet, as I said before. This one is a bit challenging. Roulet d'Arpet, Champé-Lac. So you don't say Champix-Lac, it's Champé-Lac. This is another challenging one. It's basically Isère. Again, another Praz de Fort, La Foulie, Ferret. This one here is Alpage de la Poule, Grand Col Ferret, Refugiu, Elana. We would say, Refugio Elena, but it's actually Refugio Elena. On this section, we've got Les Houches, which gets butchered quite a bit. Col Vossa, quite straightforward. Col du Tricot. That's one that probably is a bit misleading. This one here is Refugié Miage. This one, again, is a bit challenging. Auberge du Tric. You probably wouldn't, that'd probably be like Auberge de Truc. an English speaker's attempt, but it's actually Auberge d'Utrecht. And then Les Contamines, again, don't pronounce the S. Notre Dame de la Gorge. So this is, again, these soft-sounding, pleasing words, Gorge. Réfugié nan Boron. Refugié la Balma. Col de Bonhomme. Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. Col des Forts. Tête Nord des Forts. Les Touffes. Again, you don't pronounce the S. La Ville des Glaciers. Refugié de Motet. Col de la Cenie. It's another challenging word. Refugio Elisabeth A. Lac Combal. This is a bit challenging. La Visse. Not because of the word, but it's you wouldn't know how to pronounce that in English in general. So La Visse. This one is actually Cormayor, not Mayor. Cormayor. Again, in Italian, Refugio Berton. Refugio Bonatti. This one is a bit challenging. Grand Joras. You'd probably say it Grand Jurasses. Grand Jurasses is probably an English way to say that, but it's actually Grand Jura. Again, you don't pronounce the S. And then finally, the guidebook of Ciccerone. So that's something to, I think, spend a few minutes trying to go through those before you go a few times, and you'll be surprised how much other hikers of French origin are going to warm up to you and try to have a conversation with you. Whereas if you butcher it, they probably will just ignore you. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. That's just the way people are, and you have to, do your part. I don't think it takes much, and it'll make a big difference on what you experience. But again, it's your choice. Who am I? I'm a Canadian from Toronto. Why it matters? I think the big thing is, at the end of the day, is geography. Where you come from is going to have a big impact on your knowledge and your abilities and skills and experience with mountain hiking. If you're from mountain regions like Colorado, Scotland, the Pyrenees, Western Canada, the Andes Mountains, the Himalayan Mountains, there's so many mountain ranges in the world, and if you've spent time hiking them, you're already a skilled, experienced hiker. A lot of what I'm going to say is not going to have much interest or value for you. I'm speaking more to the people who are coming from lands that are flat or hilly and don't really have any mountain experience, like I myself didn't. And going into high alpine mountains is a completely different experience than hiking in the forest or rolling hills, or even small mountains that you may be going for a 1 or 2 day hike. When you're doing 11, 12, 14 day hikes in alpine regions, this is a whole new animal. It's kind of like climbing, some sort of small mountain and then going to Mount Everest. It's just a completely different world when you're doing high alpine mountain hiking. That is not going to have much, even for some of these regions. It could be quite different. I think the Pyrenees is quite similar. Obviously, I think Scotland has some short, sharp hills, but not necessarily mountains that the French Alps has. Andes is probably similar. Colorado, again, it's probably more Scotland-like. I don't think it has near the types of mountains that you're going to. I guess there's the Rocky Mountains, but there are some sections down in there, I think, that are probably similar, but maybe a little bit less. It's basically it's sort of the height. I think some of the height on the Colorado may not be similar to what's in the French Alps. I could be wrong on that. Obviously, if you're in the Himalayan regions, you're going to be exceeding what's going to be required here in the Tour du Mont Blanc, other mountain regions. You get the idea, though. In general, if you're coming from regions that don't have these mountain ranges, you haven't hiked in them before, this is going to be a whole new world of experience for you, and it's going to take a while to acquire that skill. It's not something you just snap a finger and say, well, I went for a 3-day hike in some small hill and I'm going to be fine. It's a completely different animal. My fitness level, is usually quite good. I did last year. I'm a road cyclist by nature. I did 56,000 kilometers and 106,000 meters of climbing in 2024, which is decent for me. I usually do 500 kilometers annually of jogging. I have done sea kayaking expeditions, say 14, 16, 17-day sea kayaking expeditions in the remote sections of my northern province. And I used to swim quite a bit. My hiking experience, however, is quite limited. I've done 2 prior hikes before doing the Tour du Mont Blanc. In 2018, I did the Everest Base Camp. That was my first real hike in Nepal. And I would say the profile of that hike is comparatively easy when you look at the Tour du Mont Blanc. The difference with the base camp hike is the altitude. You're at 53,046 meters, and altitude has a massive impact on your physiology. And it's just a different, that's like another level to what alpine hiking is. This is high alpine hiking, if that makes sense. But it's just, the tour, my peak was 2,700. This is at 54, so basically twice as high, if you can imagine. And that altitude has a real big impact on your physiology. You get into things like altitude sickness. Obviously, it's much colder. There's just a lot more things going on. So even though the trek itself, the profile was, not nearly as difficult as the tour is, this makes everything much more difficult by magnitudes higher. So you can't really compare the two, to be honest. The other hike I did in 2019 was St. Ives to Newquay, which is in the south western corner of the UK in Cornwall. And that's about a 70-kilometer hike along the Atlantic Ocean coast. They call it the Southeastern Coastal Trail. Beautiful section. Really enjoyed that. I did that over 2 days. It was incredible. I really, really enjoyed that, looking out on the ocean. If you like coastal trails, I highly recommend that one. And I just did a section of it. I think this one is much longer than this. You can go through the entire coastal trail. I think is like 300 or 400 kilometers. You'd have to check. I don't recall exactly, but it's much more than 70. This is just a short section, so I highly recommend anyone who likes coastal hiking to go on that. I think they call it the Southeastern Coastal Trail. I think that's the name of it. It's in the southeast of the UK, though. Highly recommend that one. My tour goal before I went was to do budget solo hiking. I hoped to do the complete tour, but didn't know if I was going to be able to do that. Not having enough reference point to decide, to see if I was going to be able to actually hike it, because I'm not really a hiker by nature. I didn't really have a set schedule, so I didn't say, okay, I want to be at this point day 1, that point at day 2. I sort of let my body dictate and the weather how far I went. So if I was feeling good, I kept going. If I didn't feel too good and it was getting late, I simply stopped. If it was raining, I tried not to hike. So I didn't want to force myself into a schedule. I did bivouac tenting and camping throughout, and I'll discuss that in a bit more later. But when you have tent and when you rely on your tent alone, you don't have to worry about a set schedule like you do on the Refugio and the Refuges, because those ones you have to be there. If you booked for Tuesday, September the 2nd, and you don't show, they don't give you any money back. You lose your money, and then you have to make your next your next booking if you miss that. So if you get, let's say you get injured or something and you can't continue, or you slow down and you don't make your end point every day, you can lose all of your booking fees just because you can't get to them on the right time. So you're even if it's raining, a thunderstorm, you still have to get there. They don't care. You'll lose your spot. And then if you let's say you're 10 kilometers short and you're tired and you can't make it, where are you going to sleep? You didn't bring your tent. You're out in the middle of nowhere. you're really in big trouble if you can't get to your set schedule for the refuges. So having a tent gives you a lot of flexibility, which is what I like to really have. And that way I can, make my tour as I want to, whether it's distance, weather, rest days. You custom design it when you have your tent. You have to carry it, which is heavy compared to those who don't, but it gives you that flexibility. And for me, flexibility is worth so much more than the comfort of sleeping in a refuge, which is not always that comfortable. So I will gladly carry my tent to have that flexibility. For me personally, I'm not saying everyone will be like that. Everyone may want to, they feel safe, or they want to be around a lot of people, so they want to stay in the refuge. But for someone who's solo hiking and enjoys, that sort of isolated moments where you're surrounded by a few people or no people, and you've got that flexibility in your schedule, I highly recommend tent camping. I've always done tent camping in Canada, so I'm quite familiar with it, and I really enjoy it. Having said that, with all of these options, there's always risks and rewards. I think the YouTube videos that are available, they have the slick GoPros and the moody music, and they're all inspirational, but they really only highlight the rewards. I don't see any of them really talking about the risks. And so you're kind of like, you see the shiny side, but you don't see the darker side. And so I'm going to probably be highlighting mostly the risks and less of the rewards, because that's already out there. I'm trying to get a bit of this information out there to people who are, novice or beginner or intermediate hikers, experienced hikers as well, but not necessarily in high alpine mountains. I'm trying to get that information out to them. There are a lot of hikers from France, Spain, and Italy who, I talked to them, and they said, well, they come to the tour, like on the weekends for a hike, and they may do an afternoon hike or a day hike, but they do that all the time. So these guys are like exceptionally strong hikers. They know the route. They know the terrain. For them, walking the tour is like you walking on the sidewalks in a big city. It's they're not even thinking about it. But myself, when you're going from the city streets to high alpine mountain hiking, you're in a completely new world. It's much more demanding than you can imagine unless you've done it. So the Tour du Mont Blanc in general, it's 170 kilometers depending on the route you take. Could be more or less, especially if you start skipping stages by taking cable cars down and then bus tour. Like a lot of people will take cable cars off the mountain, and then they'll take buses and bypass quite large sections of the tour. Not so much what I was doing, was just basically a short sector, probably about 10, maybe 10, less than 10 kilometers where I didn't, I took a bus, but they'll bypass entire sections. So, 20, 30, 40 kilometer sections, taking buses. And so this number is the full traditional route that I showed you earlier, but that can be changed by your choice or your route that you actually end up taking. The ascent in general, again, is 10,000 meters going up and 10,000 meters coming down. And just to put that in sort of perspective, because it doesn't mean much to people who don't have a lot of mountain hiking, from the Indian Ocean to Mount Everest summit, so sea to summit, is 8,848 meters. So you're basically climbing more than sea to summit of Mount Everest. But as you know, the base camp is at 5,346. Everest is at 8,848. So you got 3,500 meters from base camp to summit, which is what most people do when they climb Mount Everest. So you've got literally almost three times climbing Mount Everest up and down. That's what you'll be doing at the tour. Obviously, this one is harder because of the factor of altitude. It's completely different. It's harder to climb those 3,500 meters than it is to do the 10,000 meters ascending and descending. But it just gives you an idea of roughly what you're up against. Don't take it lightly, because it's extremely challenging even for people who are quite fit. like myself, got a long history of being athletic and keeping in good shape, it's still very, very challenging. If you don't believe it, when you get there, you're going to find out sort of what they say, a rude awakening, I think. And then how do you get there? You fly in, for most people, if they're coming outside of France, Italy, and Spain or Switzerland, or you take the bus or train if you're in Spain, or Belgium and the like, or Germany. But in general, for most of us, we're flying in. And I arrived in Geneva Airport at 9:30, delayed flight. Be careful on the public transportation out of Geneva Airport. I think the last bus leaves at 8 p.m. And if you miss it, then you're not going to get a transfer into Chamonix, which is about an hour and a half away. So you should definitely look at when your flight arrives, and then what the bus schedule is like away from Geneva Airport if you want to get to Chamonix. You can also go to Trient or Courmayeur. You don't have to go to Chamonix, and you can obviously also fly into different airports. But keep an eye on the schedule transfers, because lots of times you'll get tripped up. I got tripped up. I basically ended up sleeping overnight in the airport. Online they say you can't, but actually you can. And it's not great, obviously, sleeping on the floor, but I got a couple hours of sleep, and there's expensive hotels nearby, but again, I'm on a budget. So I literally just slept a couple hours on the floor in the airport. Other people were doing it too. And I woke up at 6 and caught the bus to Chamonix Sud, the south part of Chamonix, and hopped off that bus and immediately got another bus, shuttle bus to Les Houches. There's several stops in Les Houches. Make sure you get the right one. Marie is where the Tour du Mont Blanc arch resides, and the tourist office. So as you're approaching Les Houches, make sure you're looking for the Marie. I don't know, it might be more, there may be more names than just Marie here. It might be Marie, I don't know, something else, but it's definitely the Marie. There's only one with Marie. That's the one you want to get off at. Make sure you hit the right one. If you overshoot or undershoot, you're going to start walking back to Marie. So that's also free, by the way. The cost from Geneva to Chamonix was about, I think it was about 11 euros. I booked it on Omio for Swiss tours. That's one line. You can also get Flixbus. I booked that online as well. Within the airport proper, they don't really sell, if you go to the customer service desk, they're not going to sell tickets there. I think there might be a little, like a popsicle stand selling Swiss tours. It wasn't open when I got there, so I ordered them online. I would suggest to get those logistics right is to pre-book your tickets, your bus tickets in advance, 2 to 4 weeks at least before you go. Sometimes it's very popular to take these buses because they're quite cheap, and the tickets book up quite quickly. There's a lot of people taking those buses, so you want to make sure you get a seat. Otherwise, you could be sitting in the airport or unfortunately sleeping overnight. And if you don't pre-book in advance. So I would definitely pre-book from Swiss Tours or Flixbus to make sure you get that ticket. I think the Flixbus return was a little bit more expensive at 14 euros. I think this one was 11. Again, the distance here is about an hour and a half, and then here to Chamonix to Les Houches is about half an hour. So I left at 6, and I was in Les Houches by around 8:15. There are trains from Geneva Airport to Chamonix. They don't go direct. There is a transfer. And again, you can obviously get to like Trient or Courmayeur or other spots. Champex-Lac probably has a stop possibly as well. You have to check and check the train costs, because I think they're quite expensive. Possibly 60 euros, maybe 80 euros. They're not cheap. Hence the reason the buses are so popular. The locals in Switzerland, they get half price off because they have a train pass. Obviously, as a tourist, you're not going to have that. So double check. Maybe you can pre-book them cheap. But like I say, there's definitely a transfer. You can't go direct. And then, the bus tours, you want to maybe consider that, because they seem to be, they're good. I mean, I don't mind those buses at all, especially when you're on a budget. When you get to Les Houches, there's supplies, there's technical shops, hiking shops, ski shops. There's the big French chain of Intersport, which sells lots of different gear. And the tourist office is right there, right beside the arch. So, there's obviously Supermarché for groceries. There's Boulangerie for, some patisserie, either a pain au raisin or a pain au chocolat before you go. There's a large public spout with glacier water coming out that you can fill your bottles up with. I got some suntan lotion. I also bought a gas canister for my stove, because you can't carry those on the plane, as you know. And then if you want a knife, some people may want like a small knife with them for whatever reason. When people hike, sometimes they like to have a knife with them, not necessarily for safety, but more for whatever might come up. They may need a knife. You can take a Swiss knife, army knife on the plane, but not obviously a bladed knife. So you may want to buy a knife if you decide to. So you can get pretty well supplied in Les Houches before you go. Depending obviously on what time you arrive, like 8 o'clock, everything was opened up. I think that was Friday morning, so I didn't have any problems getting supplies before I went. It's well supplied with hiking stores and other sports stores to get any gear that you may have thought you need or forgot to bring. You then walk down that street under a bridge, and you come to the Tour du Mont Blanc trailhead, and at least for Les Houches, and then you turn left and start heading up. The Tour du Mont Blanc hiker demographics, pardon me, in terms of age range, again, this is September. I can't vouch for any other time, or even when you go, if you go in the exact same time, but other months, I noticed roughly, in general, it's obviously not scientific, but there were probably about 80% of the people on the trail seemed to be in the 20 to 30 age bracket. I would say 15% were in the 30 to 50 bracket, and then 5% were in the 50 plus bracket. So that's kind of the split down. You could go different times, and this could be quite different, but in general, it's mostly young people who are doing the tour, and there's always going to be a bit of a mix on this end of the scale, but I think predominantly it was young people who I was meeting on the trail. What else? We've got male-female break was roughly 60 to 40, it seemed. Again, it's not scientific, it's just my impression. There were more men than women. It could obviously be 65-35 sometimes. It could be 55-45, 50-50, but in general, it seemed to be there were more male hikers than female hikers in general. Where were people from that I was meeting? All over the world. I was meeting people from Colombia, Argentina, Canada, UK, USA, Spain, obviously Switzerland, Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, Czech, Slovak, Slovenian, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, East Indian, Australian, everywhere. The tour is very popular, it's very famous, and it attracts a lot of people from all over the world. So you're going to get a really good mix of different people on the trail, which is great. You get to chat with them and see what they're doing in their country and tell them what you're doing, and it's a great conversation at the campsite or the tent whenever you get a chance to speak, whether it's on the trail or at over lunch or coffee. Enjoy meeting lots of people from all over the world. I think that you're going to see that all the time when you hike the Tour du Mont Blanc. It's so famous. And then the type of people I was meeting, I would say because of the time of the year, like I say, at the end of August, there's a lot of ultra TdMB singles, runners, trail runners. That was probably about 3% of the people on the course. There wasn't a lot of them, but they were constantly coming through because the race was on. And then they also have the course laid out with markers better during that UTMB. So you might want to coincide with that if you don't mind runners on the trail. They do put lots of markers for the runners that may help you when you're hiking solo, so that's something to maybe consider. Then solo male and female hikers, myself would be in this mix. There's probably about 7%, I think, of the people were solo hiking. So there wasn't really that many of them, and I think probably male to female, I think I came across 3 female solo hikers, and all the rest were male. So there are a few of them out there. One of them was from Scotland, who was quite a strong hiker. There were a few others that I met who probably weren't as strong, but yeah, there are a few female hikers, but most of them were male. Doing solo. And then I would say probably about 35% 35% of the people were like small groups of 2 or 3, whether it was all male or all female or mixed groups, and just small groups of 2 or 3 people. That would be about 35% of the people I met. And then I would say predominantly there was 40% were couples, sometimes together with other couples or alone, but basically about 40% of the people on the trail were couples. And then I would say there was larger groups in the 5 to 10, sort of like what I would call a social club groups, mixed or all female, all male. 5 to 10, probably mostly mixed, though I don't think any of them were all one or the other, but in general, larger groups. That was probably about 12%. I don't think they exceeded much more than 10. And then you got into the larger guided groups. I say that's about 3% at this time of the year. And that was, anywhere between 10 and 20. I think I met literally 3 groups all through the trail, maybe 4, but not many. There weren't a lot of guided groups. So I think maybe if you go June, July, you may start to see a lot more guided groups because that's more popular time to go. But in general, that's kind of the breakdown of the type of hikers I was meeting. Next, we come to the social awards. The awards that I give out based on the hiker types for the Ultra Tour du Mont Blanc trail runners. I voted them the most friendly and the most respectful of other hikers, simply because they were. It wasn't what I was expecting. I thought, being competitive, having run these guys actually run the trail in less than 24 hours. It takes hikers about, let's say on average, 7 to 11 days. These guys are actually running the trail in less than 24 hours. Not all of them, but I think the record is 19 hours and 36 minutes. Don't quote me on that, but it's definitely under 20 hours, which is just phenomenal. I'm surprised more of them don't either get injured, badly injured, or fatalities, because they obviously are taking a lot of risks when they're running. If the weather is poor, like it's raining, it's surprising that more of them aren't killed simply because of the risks that they take at those, running through the area. It's quite incredible. And then, as I mentioned before, that whenever these people were approaching, they definitely were friendly. They all said bonjour, every one of them, no matter who it was. They all said bonjour, no matter how tired it seemed they were, or trying to make their best time. Every one of them said bonjour when they passed, and then they never cut you off or pushed through you on the trail, even when the trail was, there was only one good line. They actually would run around to not, try to push through. And so I give them a lot of respect. They never stopped. They just simply found a new path, if you like, to run beside you. And not one of them ever pushed through trying to, like I say, they're tired, they're competing, and yet not one of them sort of imposed themselves on myself. I don't know, I can't speak of all of them, but and all hikers' experience with them, but in my case, they were all respectful of other hikers. The guided groups, I voted them the most nervous. I think probably 75% of the guided groups contain novice hikers, so it's their first hike, and obviously they're going to be nervous, and that they get voted the most nervous. The social club groups, these would be people like who are coming from, maybe they're in a jogging club or a hiking club or a tennis club, or a walking club at home. So it's 5 or 10 of their club mates, and they all come over at once. And I voted them, quite ironically, oxymoronic, is that they were the most antisocial of all the people on the trail. The so-called social clubs were the most antisocial. The reason I say that is they basically kept to themselves. They didn't really try and interact with anyone around them. And then they sort of were a bit clannish in that regard. And they also sort of tended to impose themselves, sort of the, numerical advantage. So if there were, 10 of them and 1 or 2 hikers, they would basically sort of push their way through the trail. They definitely tried to push through myself a few times. I had a few incidents with this group. And so at the end, I voted them the most disrespectful of other hikers. Even in the refuge at lunch, they would take over a table and be loud and boisterous, and sort of everyone else who was maybe not just trying to enjoy their meal, but these groups tended to be quite loud and boisterous and taking over an entire table, and then they wouldn't just everyone else was just having their lunch and going, because there's quite a lot of volume and throughput, but they would stay for an hour or two and hog the tables basically, so no one else could get to them. So I it's a bit of an oxymoron. Like, the social clubs were the most antisocial, and I would suggest, if you're someone who is in a social club and you're trying to do the Tour du Mont Blanc, keep this in mind, because it really is off-putting. And I'll get into some of the incidents that I had with these groups. There were 2 incidents with 2 different groups, and I'll discuss them a bit later. But I wasn't expecting this, and I wasn't expecting that. So, and I kind of expected this behavior from these people, and I expected this behavior from these people, and it was actually flipped, which is kind of interesting. All the other groups that I met on the trail, be it the solo hikers, the groups, small groups of 2 or 3, mixed or male, female, and again the couples, whether it was 1 couple or 2 or 3 couples all hiking together, I vote them the most sociable, the most helpful, and they all sort of had a shared camaraderie, and everyone was kind of helping everyone else, because we were all under the same conditions, and whereas this group here didn't really interact with anybody except themselves, but everybody else was sort of a shared camaraderie, which really made my tour special. And I look to these groups for focus rather than the negative part of it. I basically focused on these one, and it was really an enjoyable tour experience. The other thing I think to keep in mind is the perception that you might get from some YouTube videos, most of the YouTube videos, and the reality of what the tour is actually like. Before I went, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I sort of came away with a certain perception, and then when I got there, of course, the reality starts to hit home. And again, that's, the perception is, I think they show a lot of the rewards of the tour, whereas the reality, they don't show much of the risks. So surprisingly, the rewards are comparatively smaller than the risks in the reality. You might get 10-15% of the tour is the rewards, whereas more 80%, 85% is risks that you have to be aware of. And then if you take care of those risks and deal with the reality, the rewards are sort of like the just what it says. It's what comes out of it, the outcome that you get out of it. If you don't take care of the risks and the reality, the rewards could be snatched away simply because you either get injured, or you don't enjoy the tour because you weren't prepared, or you didn't have enough knowledge of the trail or navigation or gear or what have you. So what I'm trying to do in this YouTube presentation is highlight more of the risks and the realities rather than the rewards and the perception. You can certainly go watch the YouTube videos for that. There's lots of them online, and they've got lots of inspirational mood music, and but that's not what this is about. Each experience is going to be unique. I can go there 10 times and have a completely different experience. You go there, you'll have a completely different experience than what I'm talking about here. It could be yourself, how you interact with other people, what route you took, what time of the year you went. There's so many factors, who you went with, how well you got along with who you went with. Any incidents that happened. Obviously, if you're hiking and you get injured on day 3, your experience is going to be, negatively impacted. So there's so many factors that can affect your experience. But the biggest factor is always going to be the weather. And that's the one you have the least control over. But in general, if the weather is quite good, your experience will be positive. And then vice versa, if the weather is quite poorly, your experience is probably going to be negatively impacted. That doesn't always correlate. Obviously, if there's good weather and you get injured, your experience is going to be negatively impacted. And, just because it's overcast and possibly drizzly a few days, that doesn't mean you're going to have a bad experience. If the weather is constantly raining with high winds and making you miserable for most of it, it's very difficult to have a good experience. You're putting in the effort and the time to climb the cols, but you're not really seeing anything. So, you're sleeping in a wet tent, and you wake up wet, you go to bed wet, and you do that day after day, and you put in all these long walks, you don't see anything. Obviously, you can expect your experience isn't going to be too positive. One thing I'll say about the weather system, where I used to do some adventure in the northern part of my province, there was actually like a 5-day cycle where it would be, clear skies, slightly clouding, more clouds, a large rainstorm, clearing, and then it would go on that cycle. And you could almost say the 4th day was always going to be a storm. And you get similar stuff happening in the mountains. Obviously, it's the first time I've been there. I've not seen it before. But the only thing is those cycles happen almost daily. Instead of it taking 5 days, it's almost cycling through a 5-day or like a daily pattern, those 5 cycles within each day. So you could wake up. It could be quite nice and bright and sunny. Then the clouds could start to roll in. The mist could roll in. It could start to rain. There could be a thunderstorm. You keep hiking, and then suddenly it stops raining. It clears up, and you go to bed, and it's bright skies, sunny days. And it's more like that. I would say, rather than one day being constantly sunny, the next day being constantly rain. You do get that. But in general, the weather tends to cycle throughout the day, and obviously you're not in the same location. Each day you're moving, so where you are on the trail is going to impact the type of weather you have as well. So you have to be kind of aware of that. And so when I say your experience is going to be tied to the weather, it's going to be really rare that you go there and you're going to get like 11 straight sunny days or 11 straight rainy days. You're probably going to get a mixed bag, kind of like what I had, where it was more sunny, I would say, at the start of my tour, and then it started to get more rainy about 3/4 of the way through, and then it sort of was overcast and a bit rainy near the end. And that was just the weather system that I came up against. But I think I was quite fortunate. I saw a lot of the panoramic views on the high cols. I didn't see everything. Sometimes it was overcast and you couldn't see, or the mist rolled in, you couldn't see things. But I think I saw probably about 85% of the really spectacular views. Even if they were only for 10 minutes and then the clouds rolled in, I still got to see them at least, which I think I'm thankful for. And in my case, the weather was quite good, and my experience followed suit. So keep that in mind as well. This is a good topic to illustrate the difference between perception and reality. Tour du Mont Blanc hike path topography. I think based on what you see in a lot of the YouTube videos, and it creates a bit of a false perception, is these shots with wide groomed trails, nice and flat with in the valleys with rivers and scenic mountain vistas and panoramas, and that's kind of what's being shown a lot. And the reason it's being shown a lot is because it's for the people taking the film. It's easy for them to set up their film and walk down the path and then basically carry on. Whereas if it's difficult terrain, it's more difficult for them to set their cameras up and walk down the path and then come back and pick up the camera. So they tend to bias the reality of the trail simply because they take a lot of shots where it's it's well groomed and relatively flat, and that's sort of the impression that you get when you watch a lot of those videos. I know because I watched a lot of those videos before I went. I didn't expect it to be all flat and groomed, but I mean, predominantly that's what they show on the videos, and so it does give you a bit of a biased perception until you get there. What you actually see when you get there is more of what I'm showing here. So I would say that's about 5% of the trail is sort of this setting here where you're in valleys and you have this sort of scenery, nice groomed trails. Probably 80% is more of what you see here, and then there's another 15% that's not shown that's going to be worse than what you see here in terms of the topography, and that's usually steeper or more challenging obstacles on the course that you need to overcome to pass it. So the reality, like I say, is you're going to see sections, and unfortunately photos never give you a good indication of depth perception for gradient. So you can imagine that these are all either hard long ascents or hard long descents. So it's rarely flat. You're either going up or down in these photographs. So take that into account as well as what you see here. But often there is loose rock that's easy to slip on. There's larger embedded boulders, or sometimes they're loose, and if you step on them, it's easy to roll your ankle. The trail is, is never straight. It's all over. It narrows. There's challenges to walk through it, and then you can imagine if there's several people on this trail, when you're passing through, it becomes more challenging if you have to walk around some of the, off the path and do some navigation through regions like this. You can imagine that, your challenges just improve or increase, as well as the risk. Now, the one good thing about a trail like this for navigation, it's quite evident where the trail is and it's easy to follow. What you're going to find quite a bit is rock fields. Where you have basically large boulders, and they as I say, it creates a rock field, and there's no real path that's discernible through this rock field. You'll have markings. This is a Tour du Mont Blanc marking, but it's not like you're going to have one of these every 5 feet to help you navigate through this. You may have one at the start, you may have one in the middle of the rock field, and one at the end, just to give you confidence you've actually navigated it correctly. Oftentimes you'll see little cairns, which are like people will pile boulders, small boulders on top to make, it's obviously man-made, but that's you'll see sometimes indicators. That's a good thing. The bad thing is that it seems that lots of people are doing that, so you kind of get confused because there's almost too many markings when that happens, and it's difficult sometimes because there's more than one route through here, and someone would say, well, I went that way and it was difficult, so I'm going to put a cairn over here and have people go that way instead of that way, and so you get these sort of conflicting markers into which direction to go. So it's not always easy even when you have these cairn markers. But in general, you have to navigate through here, and obviously it's very coarse and rough, and walking through here, again, you can wrench your knee, you can twist, you can slide. If it's wet, it's much more challenging. You're going to have to face this quite often. Here's an example of an ascent where you've got a quite steep drop on the left-hand side and a quite steep rise. It doesn't show it, but on the right-hand side, and there's just a narrow ledge which acts as the trail. And as you can see, there's lots of loose rocks and loose boulders and embedded rocks and boulders. And it's easy here to, if you're getting tired and your boot clips an edge, suddenly you lose your balance, and it's not much to fall off the edge and get injured or worse. So sometimes these drops are 50, 100, 200 meters or more, depending on where you are on the trail, and you have to navigate through regions like this. Other times you get, like I'm showing here, is a rise or a drop, so a step or a drop, and you're basically coming down and having to navigate through these stepped boulders, whether it's you're rising up again or climbing it or descending it. And again, it doesn't look very steep here because of the photo, but often they're steep, and it's usually not as this looks quite well laid out. Usually it's never this nice and uniform, and again, that's where the flexibility comes in, trying to navigate sections like this. And this, it's quite critical that you have good flexibility to climb over some of these boulders and navigate these rises and drops. The other section you're going to get is you come up to, you're on this path here, and you come up to this section. You can see the path possibly leading up to it, and then you hit this sort of boulder field type scenario, and it's difficult to know which way to the path basically disappears into the rock field, and now you have to navigate your way through it, and possibly you have to end up over here, so you have to determine what's the optimum way to get through. And if you're a strong hiker with lots of experience, it's going to be something you're used to. If you're not, you may not pick the right path, so you could find yourself out on a ledge. You could find yourself, having to overcome worse obstacles. It's not always easy to know. You're doing this while you're walking, so sometimes a bad decision puts you on a different path, and then you find yourself having to navigate a large outcrop. Whereas if you had to take in a different path, it would have been more simple to get through. But sometimes it's hindsight's 20/20, and you don't always notice it. So sometimes it's challenging to go through these sections without really knowing the best route forward. The other thing you can get into is situations, like I say, where the path is kind of obstacles are in the way. You have to climb over these obstacles. Again, there's loose rocks. Sometimes you have rock falls and avalanches that block the trail, and no one's going to come up and start clearing them, so you have to overcome these obstacles by climbing up around them or over them or whatever to continue with the path. So you will come across situations like that as well. So in general, as you can see, the perception that a lot of YouTube videos give you is not always the same as the reality. And again, that's probably about 5% of the trail. This is about 80%, and then there's 15% that is worse than what you see here. I just don't have pictures to show you, but there's other parts of the topography that are going to be even more challenging than what you see here. So keep that in mind when you're hiking, and also in your gear choice. A lot of people were wearing like running shoes or trail running shoes, who were either novice, beginner, or intermediate hikers. And for them to roll their ankles after hiking for 8 or 10 hours, they're tired, they're hungry, it could be raining, all this can be much worse when it's wet, or if there's snow on the trail. It's much easier to get injured in these situations. I myself rolled my ankle 3 times over the tour, and thankfully I had mid-calf or mid-ankle hiking boots, and each time it was a bad roll, but the boot basically stopped me from either spraining or breaking my ankle. So unless you're an experienced and a strong hiker, I would recommend everybody have mid-ankle hiking boots when they're on the trail because of these conditions, and you'll never regret it. You'll only be thankful when you do roll your ankle and it doesn't break or get sprained that you had them. So these are things to keep in mind.